Welcome in on another episode of the KIPS podcast. I am thrilled to have a guest that someone I look up to personally and somebody that I've always come to for advice when I've seen her at different conferences. We have Dr. Emily Splichal of NABOSO on the podcast. First, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Yes, let's set the stage, get things kicked off for anybody that doesn't know who she is. Dr. Splichal, can you provide some insight on your background? How did you get into the industry? How did you get to what you're doing now with NABOSO?
Absolutely. So I am the doctor part is that I'm a functional podiatrist. I'm a human movement specialist, but linking it back to fitness, I've been in the fitness industry for over 23 years. My athletic background as a competitive gymnast for 13 years really segued me into the fitness industry. Then I went to medical school and graduate school for my master's in the podiatry side. But within the fitness industry and my professional career is very much focused around education. So I have an education company called EBFA Global, where we focus on from the ground up or foot-centric education for health and fitness professionals. I am the founder of NABOSO, which is a sensory technology company. We have different products to activate and strengthen the feet and the hands. And then I am a podiatrist, so I do see patients virtually, and I love to write and create content for professionals.
Yeah. And any fan of the podcast that's listening to this episode, they know already I put links for NABOSO in the podcast, whether they're listening on Spotify or watching it on YouTube. So they're familiar with those and they know where those affiliate links are. And I talk about the products you have. I have a mat right behind me. I have a balance board over there. All great stuff for anybody that's wondering. Go check out their website. Some fantastic stuff to utilize. With getting this, talking about foot care, talking about gait, talking about walking, I thought a good question to kind of kick things off is how can somebody that's uncertain? I know that for me personally, it had to be, I'm trying to think when I did my master's program, had to be at least 6 years ago. I was at a conference and all of a sudden the presenter that was at this conference was talking about gait and walking patterns and how we can utilize these as fitness pros. And it kind of clicked in my head, but it never clicked before. Or in your opinion, what are some of these benefits that fit pros that maybe don't know or want to integrate some of these tools? What are these benefits that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about walking, kind of through the lens of a fitness professional, or of course, as a podiatrist, it really is the most foundational functional movement that we do every day. So I look at walking as this foundational movement that has certain requirements to walk the right way, to walk efficiently. So as a fitness professional, you can think about and be curious of how someone walks to demonstrate how their foot interacts with the ground, right? Just what's the accuracy of the foot contact? How do they relate to the impact forces and the potential energy that is coming in from the foot strike? How do they then transfer onto one leg? So there's a component of balance that is in there. And then when the other leg is swinging forward, we get this contralateral movement that is essentially the opposite. So pelvis is moving one direction, T-spine or rib cage is moving in the opposite. That counter rotation is really important to how our entire body moves when we walk, but it's required in other functional movements. So that's a good demonstration. And then the other big thing that you can extrapolate from how someone walks is how do they release energy? So what is the elastic or the energy transfer component of walking? And then this is done thousands of times a day, subconsciously. Very rapidly, we have to be able to check all of these requirements off within milliseconds. So to me, breaking down, assessing gait, understanding gait tells you a lot about how someone may squat, step up, throw a ball, run, etc. Whatever we as fitness professionals may encounter from other movements.
Oh, yeah. Some of the best instructors that I've seen at facilities, that is one of the most common assessments they have. They just say, hey, just walk from point A to point B. Let me just analyze what you're doing and let's start there. And in my opinion, the whole environment aspect of it. How is somebody reacting to those pieces? I know that some of the more impactful pieces of research that I've read over the last few years have done with the elder population and walking and gait patterns, but in environment purposes. So how, if they are seeing something coming in front of them, how do they react? How do they shift their weight? And it all just starts to click in your head as a fitness instructor. Oh, wow, this is important. These are things that we should be integrating with our clients. How have you seen education in this area evolve over the last few years? Do you think it's improving, getting better, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I definitely think it's improving. You still have some movement screens that are based around more like a squatting pattern or a push-up or a lunge. So they're kind of breaking it down into very specific exercise type movements. But then there's programs like Gary Gray that is very much centered around GAIT. Yeah. And EBFA's education, the way that I look at movement, very much aligns with like the Gray Institute, as an example. DNS is another educational platform or direction, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, and that's based off of kind of infantile reflex patterns that ultimately we lose these reflexes, but it allows the neurological space for us to stand on our feet and walk. So you see it. I see more people curious about it. I see people curious about the feet. The minimal footwear industry obviously brought a lot of attention to feet. So that is my business. But obviously there's a natural transition from feet, natural footwear to natural movement. Well, what's natural movement? Sure, it could be like an animal flow, but that's not really, really natural. Natural is walking, right? So I like to use these things to essentially pull it back and always go back to the basics and say that foundational functional movement that we're doing is walking. These are the demands. How do we understand those demands? And then how do we build our programming around that? Especially for, let's say, like an active aging baby boomer fall reduction, as you had mentioned.
Yeah. Fascinating. I think that these are things that for FitPro that's potentially just getting into the industry, when they are looking at their options, like I just got my certification, where do I want to specialize? How do I want to build my programming? I think these are great topics to explore. That I know that there's popular things, of course. I'm not going to say nutrition is bad. I'm not saying that they look at nutrition. They look at maybe more strength training based programs or suspension training things. Those are some of the flashier educational products out there. And I get it. 100% I get it that you see those things in the gym. You might think, oh, walking, that's not going to help me. But yeah, it is. As a FitPro, these are things that are going to help you with your assessments. They're going to help you with your program, with all your clients. So I think it's, I hope it's something that more FitPros explore with their training, with their programming and their education, with now a different piece of your education in the company that you run, NABOSO. There's a lot of it's sensory training. I think I mentioned in the beginning that I have a mat behind me, a sensory mat. I have one of the balance boards. I have the insoles. I have the toe spacers. I got all the NABOSO products because I think they're fantastic. What is sensory training for somebody that's listening? Like, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah, so I'm very much into sensory-based training, which is we are probably doing it to some degree and not realizing it. Meaning, if any of the listeners do kinesiology taping, right, K-tape, rock tape, etc. I know that was trendy for a while. Maybe it's kind of slid a little bit out of popularity, but that's a form of sensory-based application, let's say, because you are taping the superficial fascia. Vibration platforms like power plate, theoretically, that is a sensory stimulus. You have percussive guns, you have vibration rollers, you have foam rolling, you have BOSUs. So there's this element of sensory in a lot of what we encounter within the fitness industry that it's just not, that word isn't necessarily linked to it in a sense. But sensory-based training, sometimes I'll call it brain-based training. And of course, your brain and your nervous system is tied into every movement you do because you cannot contract your muscles without nerves. but it is really bringing a thoughtfulness to the details around the exercise. And I'll give you an example. So I love to teach what I call brain-based balance training. And I've been teaching balance training specifically, like really honed in single leg stabilization training, barefoot, of course, for the last decade. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're having someone do just a single leg balance on a hardwood floor, let's say. Now you, the trainer, to make it more sensorially integrated is, okay, think of this client standing on one leg. How are you cueing their eyes? What are they looking at? Are you telling them how to utilize their eyes or their vision to improve their balance? So let's say this is a 70-year-old trying to balance on one leg, right? Now, let's say they're standing there, but their hands are exposed. Well, there's thousands of nerves on our hands, our fingers, these mechanoceptors. Could I have them hold something? Right? We have thousands of proprioceptors in our joints and surrounding the fascia of our muscles. So if I hold something weighted, this is a slightly weighted ball, and I'm holding it in my hands, both the touch of the skin and the weight on my arm is stimulating the nervous system, the sensory system, right? So I'm putting some intent behind that. Let's say we get more specific and we say, take your shoes off, stand on a hardwood floor, stand on a vibration platform, stand on a NABOSO mat. We're just now bringing in even more sensory stimuli to that individual. I try to be very thoughtful when I do every exercise. I think that's maybe my clinical hat, or either I'm treating people who have injuries or I'm thinking very high performing athletes. And if I'm working, let's say, with very high performing athlete, you have to get into the nitty gritty, millisecond type details because they are so talented. They're the best of the best. So what else can you provide to that level of human performance? Yeah. Right. So that's where I look at the sensory system, the perception. You could go even deeper and go into interoception. And as you're standing there balancing, how aware are you of your breath? Are you holding your breath? Right. So things like that can be incorporated into every aspect of training. And honestly, to me, I'm a little bit biased, but I think that's the fun part of training.
Oh, yeah, I agree. When you were discussing these items, talking about athletes, movement, and the feedback, all that kind of great stuff, I use it in the form of, I'll call it loaded movement training. I use my Viper Pros a lot. I'm lucky enough that I have a whole set of them in my in-home gym. I love the tool. I think it's fantastic. With the brain aspect, the brain training of it, with each movement, each step, if you are working with a client, those are little pieces that you can dissect, having them focus on this. Where is their hip position? Where's their spine? How are they reaching with their arm across their body? All these things come into play. And exactly what you said, that when you are working with high performing athletes, you are looking for those little pieces that will help them improve in their performance. And you could take that example down to general active aging, where performances are getting out of bed, going to work, whatever that might be. But it's a piece that you can bring as a Fit Pro to your audience, to your clients, that will turn them on to a whole new way of looking at things. I know for myself, when I started integrating foot care into my own daily routine, I often do it in the morning. I think it was a reel of yours that I watched a while back. Or in the morning, I give my feet different surfaces. Instead of just slipping on my shoes right away, I'll walk barefoot for a bit. I'll put on my toe spacers. I also wear the insoles every now and then, giving them different surface, different textures to my day. And when you start working with clients that you integrate this into their programming, I think it's low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, that most likely every client that you're working with has a routine in the morning with their kids or with their, even by themselves. They have a routine that they can just do these little exercises that make a big difference, that when they eventually see you, hopefully they are feeling better, they're recovered, and that you can train them a little bit better. Now, I do want to take a step back. We're talking about something I just mentioned with foot care and different services. Can you go a little bit more into that? Because somebody listening to this, they might be a fit pro. They might be working in a gym and they might be thinking, well, should my clients be taking their shoes off? Like, that they might be worried about that in a facility. What are some of those precautions that you might recommend for them?
Yeah. So footwear, let me take a step back. Any interface between the surface, so say the gym floor in this case, and the foot, meaning the skin on the foot, anything in between there is essentially creating a sensory barrier. And when you think about shoes, also, not only is there the cushion, but then there might be drop, there might be stiffness. So you're essentially influencing someone's foundation from a sensory perspective, from a movement perspective, whether it's ankle mobility, arch mobility, big toe, etc. And the foot is so integrated into the rest of how our pelvis, our hips, our core, everything stabilizes and really finds strength. So having said all of that, is having a thoughtful either conversation or approach of what shoes could my client be in, because it's the first one. So instead of the Hoka, could I get them into more like a Vivo barefoot, just so that they can feel more, move more, etc. And if you are in a gym, which is a controlled setting, there's not going to be massive load of impact forces that you think they might get a plantar fasciitis or a stress fracture in your 60-minute session. Yeah. Sure, if you're doing box jump after box jump and jumping rope, right? But within reason. We have that, right? So most of us benefit from having more information and more freedom of movement, right? Now, having said that, if you can take the shoes off entirely and totally strip away the footwear component, one, you have socks, right, that you could do. If you were going to train someone in socks, I'm a little bit biased again, but I would do it in a NABOSO sock so that you can get the texture. If you're not familiar with our socks, we have little tiny pyramids in the texture on the inside of the sock, and there's grips on the outside so they don't slip. But you're being thoughtful to just say, I need you to feel your feet. Obviously, that's why we took off your shoes, is so you can feel your feet. So if you have socks on, I want to make sure that there are socks that drive an activation of your foot even more because of how integrated it is with stability and strength. Great. Now, if you want to go even further, which is where I would recommend it, is to take off your socks, your shoes, so you are completely barefoot. Now, I know that there's some of the gray area within commercial settings. Depends on how much of a rule breaker you are of how you can navigate it. But I will say that over the last decade, I've put a lot of effort in getting into a lot of the commercial gyms and actually changing their policies that allows people to take off their shoes. Even if they're in socks, that's great. It's so much better. If you could be totally barefoot, that's the best. And that includes Equinox, which people may be familiar with. That's East Coast, Texas. Chicago has it, California. Lifetime. So I work out at Lifetime now, and I'm totally barefoot. I'm not pressing around the gym with no shoes on. But when I lift and I'm in the Olympic lifting platform, or where they have the alpha lifting and the Olympic bars, etc., that is where I am barefoot because I want to get as much activation as possible. And if I was training a client there, I would have them take their shoes off in that controlled environment. I used to tell a lot of people to go into the group exercise studios and you can do some of your movement prep. So the movement prep on the hardwood floor, they're barefoot. It's a controlled environment. You're not in public. So you can do all that fabulous stuff, then put their shoes on and you're good. So you could also do a barefoot before shod introduction to the foot activation as well.
A quick little promo break here in this episode. If you're a fan of the KIPS podcast, you know that at some point there's a promotion for the NABOSO Duo insoles. I just pulled these out of my shoes, gave them a quick rinse to get the sock dust off of them, and I wanted to talk about them because they're great. They're fantastic. They make an impact on your daily life. If you sit at a desk or if you're on your feet, sometimes your feet just feel achy, or maybe they feel like they went to sleep. That's for myself. with your clients, with your family, with your friends. Share them, talk about them, see what they think, because they really do make a difference. If your feet feel more active, you're gonna be more active, and that equates to being more healthy. Check them out. There's a link in the description. See what all the products they have, and let's get back to this episode.
Yeah, that's a good one right there. I know that from a Fit Pro perspective that you might be worried that other people are going to watch it. This trainer has their clients taking off their shoes. They're walking around. Take them into the group exercise room, controlled environment that's clean daily, that hopefully you don't have to worry about the gossip that'll happen at a gym from you taking them through your routine of it. And so I like that one a lot right there. You touched on something that I do want to go back to with your podiatry hat on and breaking down the Olympic lifting debate of platform shoes, Converse shoes, no shoes. Where does all this kind of stem, and what is your opinion and outlook on all that, on that whole debate that it's still coming up? I still see it daily.
Yeah. So let's say someone is doing competitive Olympic lifting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're obviously pushing the load higher. You're pushing that envelope a little bit further. And I've had patients that have done this, and typically being in an Olympic lifting shoe, there is a drop. There's obviously a flat, stable platform on the bottom. So when there's any sort of split jumps, etc., that you have a very flat, stable landing base, let's say. There's then a drop, and there is an advantage to squat blocks at times or a heel toe drop. It's just simply understanding the mechanics that you want to get into the negative phase of the squat or the loading phase of the exercise more. Totally makes sense, right? You're just trying to load these muscle fibers a little bit more. So there's an advantage. I have done custom orthotics for high-level Olympic lifters as well, because what happens, and if you're watching the video, if not, I'll kind of describe it, but my hand is making the arch of a foot, and as you stand and you're loaded, you're putting hundreds of pounds on your body weight in addition to your body weight, that you're going to start to compress the arch. That's normal, arch compression. Your plantar fascia, which is the tissue on the bottom of it, if you overload because of too much weight and then you force through it, you can start to essentially bottom out or exceed that arch compression, the natural arch compression of the foot. And that's where I would recommend, this is for specific patients at specific loads, that they would then use a custom rigid orthotic in their Olympic lifting shoes. Again, that was a special situation. The way that the majority of people, because of the load at which they're lifting, could do all of their lifts completely barefoot, or maybe on a slight squat block. And I actually did a webinar on squat blocks, and the average height that is really giving the greatest research or efficacy of squat blocks is like 1.5 inches, somewhere around there. So it's not that big. You see some squat blocks that are just massive in height, and that's not necessary. You could do, again, a little over 1 inch to just get a little bit deeper in the mechanics, help keep your chest up. I get it. And of course, those could be done barefoot as well. I noticed a difference, and I try to experiment with these things as well, just for my career in situations like this, is I lift in minimal shoes. So something like a Vivo Barefoot. I actually like Paluva. Paluva is a 5-toe shoe. But I'm lifting in a 0 drop shoe, or even a couple millimeter drop. And then I take my shoes off and I feel what that feels like. And even that subtle couple millimeter difference of drop or effect on my foot position and movement affects the depth of the squat, the way it feels on my hips, my ability to activate my core. So when I do any of the Olympic lifts that I do, where I'm doing landmine activity, like lifts and things like that, whatever I'm doing on the platform, I always will take my shoes off because it feels better. I feel less connected to the lift, even if I have just a minimal shoe barrier. And that's why I encourage the listeners to kind of play with it also. and just explore and be curious of what that foot can activate.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into, so I'll teach about short foot and digit activation and how really foot to core to glute strength is based around your toes and your toes to anchor into the surface. Every shoe is going to block that to some degree. So taking off your shoes when I'm doing, let's say like a deadlift or something like that, my toes are so suctioned to the platform that's where I'm like, if I can't get that, that's where I have even 2% less of the stabilization to my lower back. I will feel that within my system. And that's what I encourage the listeners to be curious about, of socks are even going to block that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if we get all the way barefoot and just feel what your foot can really achieve?
Fascinating. I like that. I like the breakdown of it, because in my own programming, I do a lot of landmines and I focus a lot on rhythm, timing, probably because I do prescribe to a lot of what Viper Pro does and with the Institute of Motion, and that's kind of the language that they use. And so I look at it from that lens. So it's very fascinating to hear with your lens, with the podiatry aspect of it, but also sensory and how it integrates up the chain and to different elements of your body. And I think that those are pieces that Fit Pros can really play with. Exactly what you said, explore them, try these out with yourself, with your clients, but with yourself, what do you feel? And how can you describe it then to your client? Because then they might be tapping into those little pieces where they're like, oh, I do feel that. I mean, I feel like that is one of the hardest things for some trainers, is to get their clients to be in these different positions, feel these different aspects of their training. So exploring these and trying to integrate them into your program, your coaching, great pieces there that I just personally enjoyed listening how you broke all that down. But great there. A piece that I want to jump to is some resources. Now, somebody listening to this, that we've talked about, you have your businesses, you have your great stuff that's already out there, social media, your YouTube channels. What are some other resources that you personally like for discussing foot care, sensory training?
So there's other professionals that I will share that I really respect in the space of feet, fascia, movement, all of that. Robert Schleip is one. His last name is Schleip, Robert Schleip. He's German. He's actually one of the founders of the World Fascial Congress. Oh. He takes a very research-based approach to fascia. But still, he's a mover, so he can apply it. But I really love his work. Another one that is great and ties back to walking that we're focused on is James Earls. And James Earls wrote the book Born to Walk. So Born to Run is a different book. That was the one that came out 2008, roughly, about the Huarache sandals, etc. That was a trigger to the entire barefoot running boom that had existed. Born to Walk by James Earls, he takes a very anthropological approach to it. He was trained under Thomas Myers, and Thomas Myers is anatomy trains. So I like he is British. So just, if some people are like, I haven't heard him. So he's from the UK. Robert Schleip is from Germany, very much like his work. And then I would say another one lately that influences, or who has always inspired me, is Dr. Perry Nicholson. He is by far one of the most influential people in my career, especially early on, because he's someone who pushes the boundaries. He's very curious. He will motivate you to essentially keep asking why. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you repeating something that you learned from someone else, right? Is it just because they have 1 million Instagram followers and that's why? Which does not mean someone has credibility. That's a different conversation, but is just really to question things, question traditional education. He's a chiropractor by trade. And then his business is called Stop Chasing Pain. He is very much into the lymphatic system now. So his is great. I would say other specialties that have then further influenced my work has been breath work. So really understanding the diaphragm and breath work, understanding interoception, so the visceral system in the gut. A lot of interoception work is actually under psychology, so it's more of a mental health perspective. Somatic experiencing, so that's like Waking the Tiger, which is by Dr. Peter Levine. Dr. Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. Those really help you to just dive deeper into the humanity of the client that you're working with and the complexity of human beings. That is really good. And then pelvic floor, Diane Lee is great. So a lot of these, maybe it's just a reflection of my age, but are very textbook based. That's how I like to learn. I'm sure now things are more videos and reels and sort of snippets, but I like to listen to lectures. I like to listen to people who take a topic and then question it and spin it to their profession. So what I've always told professionals, especially within the fitness industry, is I said, don't learn from just fitness professionals. Like as a podiatrist, I actually don't learn from podiatrists. I want to learn from a chiropractor. I want to learn from a neurologist. I want to learn from a body worker, and then take what you learn, spin it into your niche and your specialty, because then you create your version or your interpretation of that advancement of understanding the human body and movement. That's how industries move forward, is by people taking it and then connecting it in a fresh way. That's really the science of innovation, right? Is applying it. And everyone who's listening here has that ability to do that. And I love training fit pros, because I'm like, you guys are way more creative than me. So come up with some like fascinating, really cool progressions to this single leg exercise I'm teaching you, because your brain works very different than mine. And then let's see what magical stuff we can come up with.
Yeah, I like that. I like the outlook, especially because in our industry, I think sometimes people get caught in one lane of thought that if they are into powerlifting, powerlifting's the only way, or they're into suspension training, when these are different tools to utilize. And I think exactly what you mentioned with being able to learn from different areas of the fitness industry, or even just exercise science in general, I think that is the way to go, because I always find it fascinating how we'll use the topic of core training, because I know that's one topic that you and I both share, that we both enjoy talking about at different conferences, that even different parts of the fitness industry, that how they view core training, that a physical therapist or a power lifter or even an athletic trainer, how they will view core training, and the muscles they discuss, that they share, that they emphasize, are different than maybe a strength coach, a performance coach, or just a general personal trainer. And it's always fascinating to me, but taking everything they say, instead of saying, oh, this one's right, or that one of them specifically right, take what you can from each of them and apply it in your own way, because they all have different views of how to set up clients, how to train clients, and you can explore them yourself instead of saying, I think this one's right, I'm going to go in this way. Take what you can from it and learn from it. And I think that is one of the unique items. It might be a controversial way of looking at it, but I think it's a unique aspect. So I enjoy that you pointed that out there. I have some quick items before we start to wrap it up. So just a couple quick questions that I'll call that for new personal trainers. These are questions that a new personal trainer is probably going to uncover once they start training clients. The first one being shin splints. What would you recommend to a new personal trainer? I know that I got it early on in my career. a client, oh, I just started exercising. Oh, I got shin splints. What should I do? How should they approach that question?
I'm going to give you the technical answer and then have you. So shin splints are caused by uncontrolled absorption or dissipation of impact forces, which means that there is a delay or an insufficiency in the deceleration response of the foot contacting the ground. Maybe it sounds a little bit more elevated, right? Now, some of the reasons for that are the foot is weak. So the foot and ankle complex needs to be strengthened before you start throwing rapid acceleration onto the foot and bones, right? Mm-hmm. There is where you could say, let's say this is obviously it's typically in runners that are getting it, is I would look at the foot. If the foot is flatter, I'd probably say, hey, maybe use an over-the-counter arch support to support the arch. Let's make sure you have the proper shoes. Let's make sure you're properly warming up the foot muscles and the lower leg muscles. I'd probably teach them short foot, some glute activation, single leg. They could wear a compression sleeve on the lower leg that actually helps damp or dissipate the impact forces that are coming into the shin. It is a little bit higher in women. So just know that shin splints prevalence is higher in women. So that's probably where I would start that conversation.
Good answer.
You could say it's too much too soon and you need to just slowly ramp up the mileage, but I try not to use that as a reason because it's an easy cop out answer. It's just like just slow it down, right? A little bit.
Oh, I'm sure clients that's what you just slow it down. But with the next one, plantar fasciitis. Probably another common thing that fit pros are going to experience with new clients coming in and getting into a program. How would you recommend they answer that one?
Yes. So that one, again, I would say for this is let's make sure that you are balancing the stress you're placing under your foot with recovery. So you're new to working out, so you're walking more, maybe you ran a little bit, you're doing some squats, you just have more activity on your feet than you're used to. Now your heel hurts. Stress is increased, but what are we doing for recovery? If nothing, that is the easy thing to address and say, okay, let's start to release our feet in the morning, in the evening, before you work out. At the end of your workout, grab a neuro ball, release your feet. It takes 2.5 minutes. And you're essentially starting to ramp up the recovery so that the balance between stress and recovery always stays equal or in favor of recovery. The other thing that you can kind of throw in there is just, okay, well, whatever you do on Monday, take a day off. Don't stress your foot again until Wednesday, as an example. So you can try to space the stress out a little bit further while they are ramping up and getting used to this increased activity while driving up recovery.
Low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, the recovery aspect of it.
100%.
Number one thing that I will always ask people when you work in this industry, I mean, people just happen to always feel like they got to tell you their exercise program and their injury that they have at the moment. And I always ask, well, what are you doing for recovery? What do you mean? Am I supposed to be doing something? Low hanging fruit across the board for every fit pro and their clients right there. Yes. But let's start to wrap it up here with the podcast takeaway. This question, as I have discussed in other podcast episodes, is something I took from actually he was an Ironman. If anybody saw the documentary, I think it was called Iron Cowboy. I think it might be on Amazon Prime. This individual was asked about myths for Ironman training and doing Ironmans. And I thought, I like this question. Let me spin it for the KIPS podcast. So what are 3 myths about the fitness industry?
Okay, so here's one. A myth in the fitness industry is that once you're certified, you don't need to learn anymore.
I like that one. That's a good one.
Educator. That's one of the big ones that I've heard. We want to forever be a student, and it's not about having to get so many credits to keep your certification relevant. It is just that the industry is so rapidly changing and evolving. What we understand about the human body continuously evolves just based off of research that is always done.
Mm-hmm.
You can think of even things like our understanding of fascia has changed so much over the different years. So I would say that that is a big myth, is that your education is done once you get the piece of paper. That's not true.
Yep.
The second one, all of mine are going to be education based, but the second is that I was told before that the trainer doesn't need the complexity of the muscles and the knowledge because the client doesn't care. So they're saying, I know your face, that I don't need to know the name and where the abductor hallucis in the foot originates, or the deep front line. Like, I don't need to know that that's called the deep front line because my client doesn't care. I'm never going to use those words to my client, right? So that's a myth, because it is your responsibility to have the depth of knowledge so that you can answer questions, you can program appropriately, you can understand, not necessarily diagnose injuries, but you can understand different presentations or phases of injury, healing, post-surgery, postpartum, they're pregnant, they're menopausal, whatever it is, they had a stroke. You are dealing with a human being. We are very complex, right?
Yes.
So that would be the second myth. So that would go back and say, push yourself, right? The third, I would say, is the myth would be around that being barefoot, you will drop a weight and break your foot. Which is just not true. Not true. So the risk versus benefit of lifting barefoot, as an example, in a gym with heavy metal objects everywhere, is higher. The benefit is higher than the risk of something actually dropping on your foot and breaking your foot. I just enjoy that one. Oh, I have a bonus myth. Is that people think if you're barefoot that you are going to get athlete's foot and plantar warts, and then it's disgusting. That is a myth also, because it's my bonus myth.
I like it. I have to say, but I was thinking about it with the chances. So I know that I started exercising, weight training in 7th grade. I don't know what age that is. I'm off the top of my head. And I have only dropped a weight once on my foot. And it happened, I think, in the last year and a half. But in that span, I have only had one time that I've dropped a weight. And that is years and years of working out, being in a gym. It's, you can't even put a number on it. That's that small. And I had to like jog my memory on that one, but all great ones. Before we sign off here, can you throw out some information about your different companies, where you can find them, social media, all that kind of good stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So on Instagram, I am the Functional Foot Doc, which is also my website, and that's where I see patients. So if anyone is interested to learn more about how I approach patients, or you have clients that you want to refer, I see a majority of my patients virtually. So that is how I set up that practice. For NABOSO and the sensory products that we were talking about, that is NABOSO.com, also on Instagram, NABOSO_technology. And then I have my first book, which is called Barefoot Strong. It's on Amazon. That is a great intro, kind of like a cliff note of everything about the benefits of being barefoot, understanding foot types, footwear, foot exercises, etc. And then I have another book that's coming out in the next month, which is called Sensory Sapiens. And it is looking at sensory-based movement as really the secret to longevity.
Great stuff. And I will have a lot of those in the description, whether you are listening on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Quick links to get there. Thank you. Dr. Splichal, for coming on, providing such great insight for fit pros listening that might not have any idea of that this was around. That's really what I wanted to do with this episode: provide insight, education, knowledge to help those trainers out there that want to improve the programming. So thank you as always.
Thank you so much.